to my classroom. My name is Jerome Fascione, and I'm in my 25th year of teaching social studies at Bellarmine College Preparatory in San Jose, California, and I am here to introduce my Capstone project, which is teaching controversial or difficult topics in the classroom. And you know, right now the classroom's empty. Later on, you're going to see that as I implement my lessons, it's going to be a full classroom with students in it. But right now, what I just want to do is kind of introduce to you kind of the reasons, the goals of the project, and to give you some of the reasoning for why I'm doing it to help you better understand what happens later on. So why did I choose difficult topics and teaching them in the classroom? I think for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is in my 25 years of teaching, I found it to be one of the biggest obstacles to having a successful classroom for people. Being able to tackle these topics and be able to tackle them in a confident way open up so many doors to productive conversations. And I've seen teachers come and go that have been able to do it or not been able to do it, and it really is one of the main reasons for teachers struggling in the classroom. Secondly, we had an in-service here at Bellarmine several years ago, and the theme was supposed to be race and racism, and it was going to be this whole campus-wide in-service, breakout groups, all the stuff. And several months before we actually did it, a large amount of teachers expressed concerns about their ability to talk about these topics. And so we had to postpone it for a year and go through a year-long training for several teachers to feel confident enough to approach the subject. And so I think that had me thinking a little bit more about what are the obstacles, what are the things that are preventing people from being able to do this. Third, my students. Again, I've taught over 3,000 students in my time, and the amount of growth I've seen through these difficult and controversial discussions has made me more aware of how important they are, and that it is one of the main catalysts for a successful classroom, particularly a social studies classroom, but in many other classrooms as well. You know, whether it's in a science classroom discussing evolution and having kids who may feel a different way about it, whether it's in an English classroom when you're tackling books that provide controversial either terms or ideas, being able to confront those and embrace them instead of being scared and afraid to talk about them. And then lastly, I think because our goal should be as educators to create informed citizens. And an informed citizen is a citizen that has tackled these topics, has discussed them, has analyzed themselves, understands themselves, and is able to better articulate themselves. And so for all those kind of reasons is why I kind of chose this topic. Now, my objectives for this entire process is kind of fourfold. First, we need to kind of define what we mean by controversial or difficult topics. Secondly, we're going to look at kind of the challenges that teachers face in confronting difficult or controversial topics. Third, we're going to talk about some strategies. And when I mean third, I mean is over the series of these lessons that we implement, you're going to see this stuff play out over the lessons. And then fourth, kind of the benefits or the reasons why teaching this way is the effective way of teaching and why it allows for both us as educators to get across what we want to get across and for students to become those informed citizens that we hope that they will be. So I'll start with kind of defining what I mean by difficult or controversial topics. So if I'm going to choose some of the phrases that connect with that, I would say a difficult or controversial topic provokes strong opinions. So anything where you have people expressing strong opinions, that is a controversial or difficult topic. When you have something that has differing perspectives, if you have differing perspectives, then you have a controversial or difficult topic. If there are emotional responses from it, meaning people are going to feel a certain way about it, then that may be a difficult or controversial topic. Now, usually, difficult or controversial topics are going to stem around things like race, gender, politics, religion, and a lot of these things are tied up in history as we reflect or discuss history. And so, whether it's talking about Nat Turner's rebellion or looking at the women's suffrage movement and what happened to women's suffrage, whether it's the internment of the Japanese, whether it's the Holocaust, there are topics that people are a little bit hesitant to bring up for a number of reasons, which we'll kind of talk about now. When we think about the challenges that a teacher faces in trying to teach these topics, I'm going to touch on 3 of those challenges. One of those challenges is kind of the teacher reluctance because of a fear of backlash. Now, what do I mean by that? So, I have a great conversation in class with my students. One of my students goes home and talks to his parents about it, and suddenly I have an email or a phone call from a parent who's concerned about what we're talking about in class. So a teacher in their mind is going, I don't want that email, I don't want that phone call, therefore I'm going to avoid that controversial topic. And therefore I'm going to rid my student or deprive my student of this great learning experience out of a fear of a parental response. Secondly, we have the administrative backlash. Am I going to get called into the principal's office about something that I talked about in class? And then we go further with the community backlash. Is something I said going to get outside of the school and get to where I'm dealing with something in the community about what I'm approaching? You talk about something as simple as critical race theory, which is generally just the idea of looking at systemic racism and how systemic racism plays a role in modern day America and how most of our systems have been inundated with racism due to historical facts and historical events. Now, anyone who understands history knows that that's just the cornerstone of real history. Understanding history means understanding that. But am I afraid to bring that up in class because I'm afraid of that backlash? So that's the first one. I think that's a major one for a lot of people. But I think that aside, the second one has to do with student reactions and classroom dynamics. Meaning, I want my classroom to feel comfortable. I want my students to feel like they want to come here every day. And if I'm concerned that a topic I bring up in class is going to make students uncomfortable, we don't want discomfort, generally, is the mindset. And so I think a teacher's fear, and when I say I think, this is part my opinion, but it's also based on a lot of research I've done through the literature review on this topic. And have found these ideas reinforced over and over and over again by various individuals. And so that discomfort and student discomfort prevents me from kind of approaching these subjects in a classroom setting. And then the third challenge that we talk about having to face is the personal bias of the teacher themselves or the teacher's preparation. And what I found most powerful in the research I did was the number of students leaving teacher ed programs that state that they don't feel prepared to tackle these types of topics in the classroom. And so part of that has to do with many of their own lived experiences don't match up with the things that they're teaching also. So they have an innate bias based off their lived experiences that don't allow them to tackle these kind of topics. Whether it's me discussing police brutality in class, and so if that's not my lived experience, I may have a harder time teaching it than if it is my lived experience. And so bias in teacher preparation is also one of the challenges that teachers face when trying to broach these subjects. So at this point, we have a good understanding of why I chose the topic. We have a good understanding of what the definition of a controversial topic is, and we have some of the challenges that teachers face when trying to discuss these topics. One of the second to last things we're going to look at is the strategies, some of the strategies that both I've used for many years in my classroom, but I've also discovered through some of my research now, in order to try and overcome some of those challenges. And so one of the first strategies we're going to talk about is establishing classroom norms. Another way to say that is establishing a safe environment for my students. So one of the first things you need to do is establish ground rules for the classroom. This is stuff like no personal attacks. And part of that comes from another one of the ground rules, which is presume goodwill. So someone may say something that's offensive to you, but if in our minds the idea is that they're not saying it to attack me, they're saying it because that's what they think or they believe, they don't mean it in a negative way, it allows us to have a discussion. Okay? And part of that includes active listening also. If all I'm concerned about is answering back, I'm not even hearing what you're saying anymore. The minute you say something I disagree with, my brain shuts off and I'm ready to talk back, as opposed to being able to actively listen, hear somebody out before I form an opinion. So that's one of the main things that I feel like is done in a classroom that allows for the classroom to feel safe. Another one of those things is having an inclusive environment. So part of those classroom norms is having an inclusive environment. Everybody is free to share without being attacked. Now understand what I mean by that. Not being attacked, not being yelled at, not being disciplined. You're free to express opinions. That's not to say your opinions won't be challenged, but the students shouldn't feel as though they cannot talk in your class. And I think that for some people, that's also one of those slippery slopes, those lines where they don't know how to navigate that. So if you don't know how to navigate that, you just don't bring it up at all. Okay, so establishing classroom norms is the first. The second one, strategy, is making sure that what we're doing is centered on the idea of teaching critical thinking skills and empathy. And if we're doing that, present multiple perspectives. Allows the student to see all the different views, all the feelings from both sides. Analyze the evidence afterward, and that allows us to not see all opinions as equal. It allows us to be able to truly take one of the opinions or one of the points and elevate it above the other, while not dismissing the other person completely, if you get what I'm saying. So that goes back to the inclusive environment where everyone feels free to share. But you don't leave the room. I'll give you an example. We're talking flat earth, round earth. Yeah, the flat earther is free to express their belief that the earth is flat. Then we lay out all the evidence, and we make an educated decision based on all the evidence. But that's not to say we tell the person who says flat earth to be quiet and stop talking, if you get what I mean by that. And so to me, that one's one of the keys too, that teaching empathy. We have to be able to see the world through the other person's eyes. Even if it's not right, we need to be able to see it through their eyes so we can have the discussion, and they need to feel free. I always tell my students, you can't change if you don't express what you believe, because then you'll never be challenged. And so you have to feel free to express your ideas and be open to your ideas changing. And then third, obviously in the strategies, is scaffolding discussions, which means I want my discussions to start off maybe a little less controversial and then work their way up, so we have the ability as a class to kind of slowly get to that place where we can tackle the real hard topics. We don't want to jump right into the hard topic right away without any training. Okay, and then part of that second one, which is teaching critical thinking skills, also includes balancing perspectives, which means when I get that information as a class, we can't leave. I'm not going to leave the room saying, all right, we have an opinion of flat earth and round earth, both good opinions, let's leave for the end of the day. You have to balance the perspectives out and look at the evidence and then present where the evidence goes. You know, and again, we're talking about things that have factual results, earth, round or flat, as opposed to whether hot dogs are good or not. There is no, that's an opinion, but earth, round or flat isn't an opinion. We have evidence that supports one of those one way or the other. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is kind of the benefits of teaching these controversial topics, implementing the strategies to deal with the challenges. One of the main benefits would be that, this goes back to our informed citizens, that we create students who are willing and ready to be civically engaged. We want students that leave our classrooms ready to tackle the hard topics in the world, ready to, and are well informed on those topics, so that we have an informed populace. You know, it's rather interesting when we talk about the exit polls from elections and you hear things like the uneducated voter tended to do this. We shouldn't have uneducated voters in America. We should have people who are educated. And that doesn't mean you have to go to college. It can mean that our high schools are doing what they're supposed to do in informing our population about these types of topics and challenging kids to think more. Secondly, we have more social emotional learners. What does that mean? That means students, and typically we think of that as, nowadays, college educated kids. Kids that went off to college, had the freedom of being off at college, met new people, new peers, went into classrooms, tackled topics that were very difficult to attack, that higher level of education, which creates empathy. And so we want that. That's a huge benefit, to have empathetic people making decisions that see the world more than just their own little perspective. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we are building tolerance and understanding, and most of that comes from the social emotional learning. That we have people who have had these experiences see the world in a much bigger vision, as opposed to this narrow tunnel of the world that they've seen. So I'm hoping that your experience with both this video, the second video is a student panel that I created, that has students talking about topics centering around controversial topics, and I hope you enjoy kind of the perspective of the high school student on a lot of the questions that we posed on whether these are important, what have been obstacles, those kind of things. And then we implement it through one of the 7 lessons we do. We actually implement it in class, and you can kind of see how it played out through the class. Thank you for joining me, and have a good day.